When I first got into EuroRack, my biggest fear was that this would become like a crazy addiction and that I would just continue to buy modules forever and never really make music with them. So I made myself a rule that I would buy one case, I'd fill that with modules, that was my investment, and then if I wanted to buy a new module, I would have to take something else out of the case. And that's actually worked pretty well. Not perfect, but pretty well. Until now, because I just ruined that rule for myself by buying a new case. This is the 6U RackBrute. This is the 6U RackBrute from Arturia. And yeah, so now I have almost twice as much space. So I guess the addiction is back on. This here is the reason I got the new case. The Vector sequencer from Five12. It is amazing. It is so much fun. The little melodic sequence you can hear in the background is being run by this right now. I'll do a separate video on it and kind of walk through what makes it amazing and what makes me really love using it. In order to get that, I needed more space. So that's why I got the case. I took that as an opportunity to reconfigure this case with my two sequencers now, Rene and Vector. And then I had a whole row underneath, and so my thought was, why not put in all my drum-related modules? So, got the Euclidean sequencer, branches from Mutable Instruments, 3 modules from MFB, bass drum, snare drum, hi-hat. Then I got recently this weird module, Himalia by Instruments. Not sure if it fits in my drum rack yet, but we'll see. And then finally I have a mixer by Synths. Everything here is being clocked by MIDI input that is coming from my Electron Digitact. Do another video on how I'm wiring everything up as well. But that's what comes in. It powers the clock and the run for the Vector, and it also sends the clock over to the Euclidean Circles sequencer. Output from the mixer goes into this little weird module from Doepfer that connects to my other case via 2 Cat8 cables. I will probably end up doing another video on that as well. But for today, let's just take a quick look at the rack section here, or the drum rack section. So let's put something on here. Let's start out with the first sequencer. Sequencer 1. Let's have that trigger the bass drum. And let's wire the output from the bass drum into the mixer. Alright, so if you're not familiar with Euclidean sequencers, the idea is that we have a number of steps. Right now, that's 16 steps. And then you determine how many beats do you want within those 16 steps. If the number of beats is divisible by the number of steps, then it's pretty simple. So right now, 1, we just get that one there. Turn this dial, add a second. Well, those fit neatly on either side. What happens if we add a third? Now things start getting weird. If we turn it back to 4, we're divisible again. It's pretty simple. 5. So what the Euclidean algorithm is doing is essentially choosing where do these steps fall. And it's an amazing research paper by a professor at McGill University that walks through all of that. I highly recommend that anyone who's interested in this, go read that. It's a really fun paper. But what this allows me to do is, as I'm jamming, as I'm doing something, I can quickly turn these little knobs and get different complex sequences. I can add more or less complexity, and that way quickly adjust things. Now, if you do that on all your different parts, it becomes a little hard to follow along with as a listener. So right now we're just going to keep the bass drum on 4/4. Makes it easy to anchor everything else into that. But let's get something else into play. Let's get the snare drum going. So right now, 16 steps, but with 0 hits. Let's start turning the little dial here. Now it's time to get something fun. And so the other way you can manipulate things with Euclidean circles is if I press in on this, I shift to the next mode, which allows me to determine how many steps I want in my sequence. So this allows us to use Euclidean rhythms, but use it in a polymeter. And again, I can do this as it's playing to create something really fun. Other little method of controlling this is you can choose the layout. So you see I'm turning here, it's turning the lights. So I can choose where they align, and that just lets me easily align things, like if I want 4 on the floor bass drum and then a snare on every other. That's a really easy way to do that. Let's add some more steps here again. Maybe. And, so having a more complex beat like this is definitely fun, but it fills up a little bit too much of the space. So one of the things I like to do here is use branches. So let's quickly wire that up. If you haven't tried out branches before, it's a pretty simple little module. It has 2 sections that do exactly the same. Each of them have a probability, an input, and 2 outputs. And so in this case, the probability decides which of the 2 outputs it should send to. So I plugged in the snare into output B. So when it's all the way over here, the probability is that we should hit output B every time. And we get the same as if we had wired it directly. But as I'm turning it over towards the other way, it's now at random picking that all the way over to the point where we almost never get any hits. And you don't have to use the knob for this, you can also modulate that. There's an input there that controls the probability. I think it's a really interesting way to add a little bit of life and a little bit of changes and a little bit of random to your drum sequences. All right, let's add in another module. Let's wire in the hi-hats. Alright, and it's currently blank. Let's add some steps. Do the same thing with the hi-hats. Let's throw some random probability in there. So instead of wiring it straight up, I will patch it into branches. that's pretty much it. I do have a few other fun tricks in here. I have two modules up here. One is BRST, which is a little module by 2HP that allows me to do ratchets. So essentially I can pass one of these into it, then down to a module, and then I can modulate and say whenever I want ratchets or not. The other one is a router, which takes one input, and then I can control where the output goes. Which means I can have a sequence going, but have it switch between different drum or hi-hat sounds, etc. for every step. And the fun part, of course, is using Make Noise Rene not to sequence tones and semitones, but instead use it to sequence CV values for other things. So I can fire off a sequence that chooses when to ratchet, or that chooses when to switch between tones. I can also use that to sequence branches and sequence these probabilities. I think that's about it for now. Pretty short video, but I will follow up later with more on Vector and probably also on a little bit more complex wiring in my little drum rack here. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was useful, and I will talk to you later.